We'll call the meeting to order. As to roll call, all members are present. If everyone would check your cell phone, make sure they're turned off, please. The first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the April 3rd, 2018 meeting. Do we have a motion to approve? Mr. Lopez, thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
Mr. May? Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. This is the time for public comment. If there's anyone wishing to speak to the board about any item other than the public meeting item that's later on the agenda. Seeing none, we'll close public comment. The next item is the deviation request for 262 Academy Avenue. Are you the applicant, sir?
Yes, I am.
Could you come up to the microphone? Would you state your name and address for the record?
Good evening. I'm Dr. James Gavin,
Your address?
262 Academy Avenue here in Oviedo.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit about your project?
Yes, my wife is a native of Oviedo. I've been coming here for 50 years now, since she was a student and when we met in college, and we have been fortunate enough to build a home which we will occupy permanently over the next several months. And the deviation that we are asking for is related to a perimeter fence around the project, the home that we have built on the land site there at 262 Academy. And there are several reasons, if now is the time to go into the reasons for the request. Okay. First, let me thank you very much for the opportunity to present it, and thank you very much for your thoughtful consideration of the request. But there are several reasons why we've made the request for this deviation. First, our property sits on a corner. It's a corner lot, and it's where Academy Avenue makes a turn and leads down to Academy Place. The curb, the concrete curb in front of our house actually ends 45 paces or so from the turn itself. So there is no curb. And as a result, cars will simply cut across the turn. We have tire marks that actually are on the property where people cut across the property at that turn. We are across the street from Jackson Heights Middle School, and frequently, while we certainly love the little kiddies, but frequently the kids forego using the sidewalk, which is on the other side of the road, and they just simply trek across the property. And then cars and trucks, sometimes that are there for school functions, sometimes utility trucks and people making deliveries will park, sometimes make turns up into that area of our property. And then finally there is, and all of these situations would be relieved by the variance that we are requesting. And then the final consideration is that there are a pair of nesting ospreys that are in a tree, which would be comfortably removed from the fence line if this variance is approved. So those are really the reasons for the request. And as I mentioned in the written response that I made, we understand that the mitigation requirement would be to plant shrubs along the fence line, and that's absolutely no problem at all. As a matter of fact, I think the plan that was submitted by Mr. Moore actually showed where the anticipated shrub planting line would be. So that presents no issue at all. Is there anything else
Are there any questions of the applicant? I have one. What type of fence is it?
It's an aluminum see-through fence, no spikes. It has a flat top, and it looks it's more decorative than anything else, but it looks like it's sufficient to keep out. And I hope nobody ever really challenges it, but it's a nice fence.
Okay, thank you. You can have a seat.
Madam Chair, I have a quick question, if you don't mind.
Mr. Pollard?
The deviation request is for additional height on the fence, correct? And from, I think it was 4 feet to 5 feet in certain sections to match up with a fence pole that's currently existing?
Yeah, the current fence that is there is a 5-foot fence, and this is what we're requesting, a 5-foot fence.
To match up to it.
The gate, yeah, to match up with that. The gate posts that are there at the driveway are 6 feet.
Okay.
And I think the way this is structured, I think the language in the variance had to be benchmarked against the highest part, which were the gate posts. But the fence itself is a 5-foot fence.
Okay. And then as far as why wouldn't a 4-foot fence meet the needs of keeping the people off the property versus a 5-foot fence? Is it because what's the reason for that?
Well, the choice of a 5-foot fence was made principally on the recommendation of our builder. We have a big problem with deer, and the suggestion was that a 4-foot fence would be like a step for the deer. A 5-foot fence might be a little bit more challenging. So far, I haven't seen where that's played out because they've eaten just about everything we planted so far. So
Sure.
It is what it is right now. So.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
That raises another question. The viburnum, is that something deer eat?
They have not. We have some viburnum on the property already, planted around the air conditioning unit and around a little shed. They have simply studiously avoided. I wish viburnum could grow citrus fruit, but they've not bothered the viburnum at all.
Well, I would hate to see you plant 70 to 80 of them only to have the deer eat them.
You know, it would be like the deer would say, "Welcome to Shea Gavin," or something. I mean, like cafe or something. But no, they don't seem to. But I was glad to see that it was a recommendation for viburnum, because I said, well, at least that way, once we plant them, we know they'll be there. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
May we hear from staff?
Good evening, Madam Chair, board members. As Mr. Gavin mentioned, this is a request for the board to approve a fence deviation for the Gavin property at 262 Academy Avenue to install the 5-foot fence, which is 1 foot higher than the max 4-foot height, but the fence location is also not at the 2-foot line, but it's at the 4-foot line. So there's a little give and take that we had negotiated with this fence contractor. The deviation is also to, at 50%, is to allow him to keep the gate posts that were already there. So we analyzed the deviation in regards to section 2.7 of the code. And what we found is that there are special conditions and circumstances around the Gavin property, as Mr. Gavin had mentioned. Their property occupies essentially the entire corner, so they don't have any abutting property owners, they don't have any abutting structures. The area in that, the area uses are all residential except for the school. And as Mr. Gavin said, the purpose of the fence is to prevent or avoid unwanted or unwelcome trespassing on his property. The intensity and the scale of the fence that he's proposing is compatible with the surrounding area. It's a see-through fence, so it would not create any visual obstructions to cars turning and navigating that roadway. And the mitigating techniques, I think, are pretty substantial compared to previous requests where it's typically 2 trees or smaller shrubberies. They are agreeing to put in 70 to 80 viburnums depending on the spacing when they actually plant the trees. There are no environmental impacts from this deviation request, and what they're asking for, staff believes, is the minimum necessary to get them the security and privacy that they're looking for. and there were no existing non-conforming situations on neighboring properties that were considered as part of staff's review. So with that, we recommended approval of the development order with the condition that the applicant agreed to, which is the 70 to 80 viburnum trees. Shrubs.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions of staff?
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Mr. Pollack?
My only question is with regards to the 70 to 80 viburnum that are being required as, forget the word, that are being required for the project. The idea of the see-through fence not posing any barriers to vision, but then requiring them to plant 70 to 80 shrubs that along the see-through fence would no longer make the fence see-through. It would actually make it not see-through. Why is there the requirement for a see-through fence to have viburnum planted against them?
Well, we had asked them what type of mitigation that they would be willing to provide. They had offered 70 to 80, which is well beyond what staff would have required anyways. And the part of the condition is that they don't plant it in the triangle, the site distance triangle. It's mostly to soften the primary front of the property. There's a big, I have a map here. So it'll be mostly in this area, the fencing and the plantings, but part of the condition is that they don't obstruct the site triangle.
Okay. And so the applicant volunteered to plant the viburnum.
Yes.
Is it necessary for the approval that the viburnum be required?
Well, the viburnum is the species that they selected. We had only required that they take the species from the landscaping guide for the Central Florida region that's compatible with our climate, and this is the plant species that they selected.
No, and I guess what I'm alluding to is, I think it's a tremendous expense to have somebody to buy 70 to 80 viburnums. You know, if you're just the small, 10-gallon pots, you're looking at like $8 to $10 per plant.
Right.
So, and I appreciate the applicant's willingness to volunteer to plant that many. But is it necessary that we require him to plant that many in order to have the deviation?
No, it's just enough to buffer, like maybe for every post. That would be what we were expecting, something to soften the edge. When we asked them to give us their suggestion, his first response was the 70 to 80 viburnums.
So what would the minimum that staff would have recommended had you not volunteered the 70 to 80?
It depends on because the reason why it's 70 to 80, there's not a hard number, is that the contractor that we contacted at the time when we were drafting this up, he wasn't at his shop, so he didn't know the exact linear footage. So the spacing would be based on the maturity of the trees. So once he knows the exact linear footage from the east side of the gate post to the furthest corner, and then coming back the site distance, then he'd space them out that way.
Right, and that's, I guess, what I was getting towards is, I guess what I'm not comfortable with is the requirement of a specific number of 70 to 80 when we don't really know how many he may or may not need in order to mitigate the fence. And I just don't want to burden the applicant with having to purchase and plant a certain number of trees if it's not necessary in order to accomplish the mitigation.
Right, no, I understand. So I would imagine it would be according to the spacing of that tree type or that shrub type.
Okay. So I guess what what we're trying to accomplish is a sufficient number of viburnum to mitigate or soften a certain portion of the structure that's in front of what the poles you were mentioning or something.
No, the poles come. The gate posts are there. The gates are coming to it.
Okay, so the purpose of the mitigation is to cover those gate poles.
Part of it.
Okay.
It wouldn't be every single gate pole because
Every single gate post, a fence post or the gate post.
Fence post.
Okay.
The gate posts are already there.
Okay. Okay.
There are only two gate posts. They're the ones on either end bookcasing the driveway. So these will be fence posts.
Okay. So the idea here is to have a sufficient number of viburnum to mitigate the fence posts. Okay. Would staff be comfortable articulating it that way rather than 70 to 80, or is it?
Yeah.
What if 68 viburnum or 65 viburnum satisfy the fence posts?
too carried away.
I'm not.
It says on here, depending on the spacing already in the clause, so it's not guaranteeing them just the 70 to 80.
And that's fine. I just want, my point of this is not to be like
I
splitting
think-
hairs.
I think we're
I
getting-
just want to make sure the applicant doesn't get to 65 viburnum and he's where it met where he needs to be, and they go, well, you have to purchase another 5 and put
I
it somewhere.
understand.
I just don't want to do that to him.
But it clearly states based on spacing. So that pretty much...
It says 60 to 70. Based
Then
on
it's,
spacing.
then it's got open parentheses depending on spacing, closed parentheses, which kind of predicates that that's just a number based on what she just said, that the builder called, he wasn't at his office, didn't know the spacing. That's why she put that in there.
No, I understand that. I just don't want to have something in writing saying he has to have 70 to 80 based on spacing. I would be more comfortable if it said something like, a sufficient number of viburnum to, depending on spacing. But, I mean, I'm splitting hairs. I just don't want the applicant to be overly burdened by trying to meet a mitigation requirement. That's all. If the applicant's comfortable with 70 to 80, then I'm fine with it.
Mr. Pollitt, my understanding from our staff report is that the owners already agreed to it.
Yeah, I understand.
So apparently he didn't have a problem with it.
No, I know, but when people want to get something approved, they're motivated to do things that are above and beyond what we might need them to do, and I just don't want to take advantage of the applicant's willingness to do whatever's necessary in order to get the deviation approved. I was just trying to be advocate on the part of the applicant. But that's fine. I have no more questions then, and I'm sure the board will have a motion.
Okay, this is a public meeting item. First, are there any other questions of staff? Okay, this is a public meeting item, so we'll open it up for public comment. Is there anyone else wishing to speak to the board at this time? Seeing none, we'll close public comment on this item. What's the board's pleasure?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Loeb?
It's because I'm sitting on the wrong side.
Yes, you are, that's it. Mr. Wright?
I make a motion to approve the deviation as submitted.
A second.
Mr. Minton, thank you. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Good luck with your project, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item, public hearings. We don't have any of those. Discussion items. Are there any items we need to discuss that aren't on our agenda? Okay. Future meeting dates are June 5th and June 19th. Do we know whether or not we'll have any items on those?
I don't think so. We're not ready for that. We're not ready. No, ma'am. No.
Okay. But there could be something that comes up between now and then. Okay. Thank you. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We stand adjourned.